dialogue and cooperation matter more in times of crisis to face down our common enemy, the pandemic. We believe in science, not rumors. We cooperate instead of playing the blame game. Good journalism seeks truth from fact reporting. We hope the mandate of life-saving will transcend the geopolitical rivalries between the U.S. and China. China stands ready to help when we are facing serious external threats of COVID-19. To take a look at the latest international coordination, I'm pleased to be joined via satellite by Anna Tangen, an independent current affairs commentator, via Skype by Professor Zhang Gong from the University of International Business and Economics, and Marcus Rubenstein, editor of APAC News. That's our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Welcome to our discussion here. Now, Anna, the world is undergoing remarkable stress and change right now. Global solutions are yet to be found. So what do you think of the adversity of the situation as the G20 virtual summit brings major countries together again? In what specific areas do nations need to strengthen public health cooperation? Anna.
Well, before I begin, Yang Rui, congratulations. I know you're the longest-serving host in CCTV history, and it's been a long and remarkable career, and look forward to seeing more from you. In terms of the topic, what we're looking here is the health and then the economic consequences thereafter. And people are unfortunately confusing them. Until you understand and control the health issues here, the coronavirus-19, you are not going to be able to accurately calculate what the economic damage is. And so right now, it's a shame. The communique from the G20 has been issued. And unfortunately, despite a plea by President Xi Jinping to take 4 simple steps involving science, using science, controlling the health situation on a global basis, and doing the same in terms of the economy, using the best of what the world has to offer, bringing forward together the health ministers. That was ignored, and basically the communique was just a series of hopes of things that should happen, but without any detailed plan.
John, do you agree that politicians of the G20 have failed to establish a consensus at the times of crisis?
Well, I think it's at least too late. I'm not sure it's too little. But before further elaborating on my point, I guess I'm going to join Anna in congratulating you. The last 20 years has been a heck of a time for the Chinese television here. You and Dialogue will leave your place in history of television. So congratulations, and wish you all the best for your next thing, your next career. So
thank you, both of you. Thank you, both of you, Anna and John, for the very touching, comments on my performance on this wonderful platform of Dialogue for 2 decades. And thank you for sharing this defining moment of friendship and the trust.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so let me continue. I think the G20 is a little bit too late. It should have been convened at least, I think, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think it's mostly because of the chairman right now in Saudi Arabia has been less affected by this disease, and I think they should have organized this some time ago. But in any case, I think it's probably still not too late in the sense that there are still a lot of things that the member countries can do. These are the leading countries in the world, and actually they're also the most affected countries by this virus. So there are a lot of things they can do together. I think for the moment, the priority is to cooperate. It's about cooperation on the medical and healthcare side. There are still a lot of things that can be done. Among the scientists from these member countries in terms of developing the cure, developing the vaccine, sharing information, and also in the area of helping each other. I've been saying this. I've been advocating this for some time already. Currently, New York City is in a dire situation. I mean, they are in desperate need of ventilators. I think China really should, fly over some ventilators. And we've already gone through this, and I think that we do have spare ventilators that we can sent to America to save people, to save American lives in New York City in particular. So these are the areas that can be done, I think, immediately. Now, in the financial side, I think, currently I still think it's too early to talk about economic recovery. I think, the United States and Europe are still at least 2 to 3 weeks away from getting into the recovery mode. Right now, it's all about saving lives, and saving lives.
Anna, how do you see China and other countries' roles in this global fight? What lessons should be learned, and do you think there will be?
Well, it's the clear lesson that can be learned is how China approached this. It's not an accident that right now there have been, for the last, 5, 6 days, no new cases within China. This has been a very, very coordinated, well-planned, executed situation here. So countries have to look at that and adopt what they can. They can also look at what they have done in South Korea in terms of using technology, making sure that they're getting help to where it needs to be. So regardless of how countries want to react, they have to look at the facts and get above the kind of emotional nonsense which is going on. You have leaders from 2 very important countries, Brazil and the United States, who continue to try to minimize this situation, saying it really doesn't exist, or don't worry about it, or you can go to work, or you should go out and eat. These are clear paths to having a really explosive epidemic which could overwhelm their economies. So at this point, it's not that China has done everything right. It's just simply China has achieved an effective result. So learn from that. Stop criticizing what China has done. It's come at great sacrifice. It's time now to just let the scientists be in charge. Let the health experts do what is necessary. Stop making this a political or economic tool for either your election or for denial.
Well, the latest article by a columnist of the Financial Times, Mr. Lehman, sought to strike a balance ideologically between China and most of other Western countries, that China was somehow isolated in the early days of the outbreak because we had imposed draconian lockdowns, and we have adopted very tough measures to minimize the negative impact of the epidemics, but we drew a lot of fire from a skeptical West. But today, it seems it's very difficult for Western authorities to copy what we have done. Therefore, John, what do you think of the perspectives that Mr. Lehman, the columnist of Financial Times, sought to come up with something meaningful at a defining moment of, say, a Westless world, seeking illiberal perspectives, alternative truth, whatever you call it. But it seems we are studying very hard the theme of the recent Munich Security Conference, which is entitled "In a Westless World."
Well, I beg to disagree, actually. I think this is not a time to talk about politics. The so-called draconian measures in China, at the very least, it works. Look at how many infections in the height of this, thousands and thousands of infections at the height of this outbreak. Now we've gone down to 0, right? 0. We've been to 0 for a couple of days already. So, in fact, clearly, the so-called draconian measures works. So I think this has nothing to do with the political system in the United States or in Western countries versus in China. As long as the government is strong enough to take these measures, to enforce these measures, and the citizens, the liberal citizens are willing to cooperate, I think, these things can be done. I think look at South Korea. They've been pretty effective in reducing these numbers. Look at Singapore. They've been pretty effective in reducing these numbers. So I think this sort of narrative that this is unique to China, because of China's political system, blah, 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 I don't quite buy it. I think it's all about the political will and a good governance. And look at the President Trump has done in the past. He's been downplaying this. he has issued all those misleading remarks about, this is a miracle going to disappear one day, like a miracle is going to disappear one day, this is a corona flu, all these things downplaying the severity and the viciousness of this virus. And I think it's coming back to haunt him. And we all know that. And unfortunately, his administration, particularly his Secretary of State, is trying to blame another country, particularly in this case in China, for the problem currently spreading in the United States. And this is very unfortunate. It is basically is providing a political cover for his blunder, in my opinion. So I think at the end of the day, it's all about good governance and leadership. Right now, it is all lacking, on both sides in the United States.
Yeah, politicians and media players seem to be trading accusations. And let's take a look at the performance of the media the world over. Anna, here I want to quote Dr. Tedros, the WHO Director General. This is the time for facts, not fear. This is the time for science, not rumors. This is the time for solidarity, not stigma. Why does he need to say this? How do you see the differences in viewpoint among politicians and regional blocs in facing this threat?
Well, viewpoints would infer that there's some sort of logic or rationale to them. I mean, quite frankly, you have leaders who are acting like children. They're denying this. I mean, Donald Trump comes to mind, Bolsonaro also. They just keep denying this in spite of the fact that the facts are there. This is very simple. You have to contain the coronavirus. If you don't do it, it spreads. I don't know how much more simple it could be. Yet, you keep hearing these alternate realities and thoughts, minimizations, denials, even encouraging people to do exactly the wrong thing. I mean, Donald Trump is talking about, well, I'm going to issue new guidelines which will help communities open up, get beyond this thing. As if it's something of a choice or that it depends on where you're at. This is a virus. It doesn't have a passport. It goes wherever it can. It's highly infectious. We know this. The U.S. is now surpassing China in the total number of these coronavirus cases. And soon it looks like it will be surpassing China in terms of the number of fatalities.
Anna,
when that
an opinion article in New York Times titled "Call It Coronavirus" called on people to seek facts, respect the truth, and stay clear of stigmatizing. How do you see the differences among media in reporting the epidemic? We are looking at performance of journalists. And what is good journalism? How do you define good journalism in times of crisis? Very quickly, Anna, I'd like to have your thoughts, and then John.
Okay. Good journalism is when you present the facts and let people make their own decision based on them. Unfortunately, it has become a situation where many journalists are playing a Jekyll and Hyde game. They come in with preconceived ideas and they try to join them together with the facts. That is opinion. That is what we do here. We discuss things where I'm not trying to report on the issues, I'm trying to comment on them. So when the journalists cross that line, no one knows what to believe anymore.
And truth will be the first casualty. John, what do you think of the current crossfire between media organizations?
Well, Anna mentioned journalism. I just want to add a note about on the opinion side. I think the OPED business is also very important in terms of portraying a correct picture to the public. I mean, these are the opinion shapers and makers. I mean, they really can influence people. Unfortunately, there are still many media outlets in the United States who stand up against what President Trump has been saying. They've been doubting what he's been saying from the very beginning. You look at the very good OPD articles from New York Times, for example, as you mentioned one. And I've been tracking Washington Post articles as well as CNN OPD articles. These articles really have been questioning what he has been saying all along. And then we all know that, unfortunately, Fox News has been sort of beating the drum of supporting him initially. I mean, look at these hosts at Fox News and how fast they've been changing within 24, 48 hours of exactly what he said just a few days ago. So I think it's not just only about journalists reporting correctly, telling the truth, all truth, nothing but the truth, but also more about these opinion makers and shakers, the OPD writers, really putting people's life, American people's life, in front of political interests, if they have any. Usually they do. Political interests they're associated with. So I think this is very important. It's about saving lives, as I said again and again.
In a way, we are all movers and shakers, shaping the perceptions of the general public, and if possible, minimizing prejudices through our serious efforts as good journalists. Thank you for being with me, and when we come back, we'll be joined by Mr. Marcus Rupinstein, an Australian journalist. Stay with us, we'll be right back.
CGTN, covering coronavirus. From Asia, Africa, Europe, and America. The dangers, the uncertainty, a global effort to stop the spread and save lives. For the latest updates on coronavirus, stay with CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. In the second half of the program, I'm very happy to be joined by Mr. Marcus Rupinstein, an Australian journalist who works for APAC News. Welcome to our dialogue, and welcome again, Anna Tangen. My first question goes to Marcus. An opinion article in the New York Times titled "Call It Coronavirus" called on people to seek facts, respect the truth, and stay clear of stigmatizing. So how do you see differences among media in reporting the epidemic?
Look, we're in unprecedented times around the world. I've noticed the confusion and the level of confusion in public discourse and in the media in Australia is so high that in the last 2 weeks I really haven't taken my eye off what's going on here. So it's just such a fast-moving story, and I think many countries are looking inside at what they can do. And many people in the West, as has become quite apparent, did not see this coming. And certainly in Australia, people haven't seen it coming. And so really, you know, we've had mixed messages coming from many media outlets, from many governments, our own government included. And the discourse has not been great. I certainly feel that when we can finally, as a world, put this crisis behind us, that the level of discourse and cooperation must increase.
Marcos, the WHO has a rule of not labeling disease based on particular regions or peoples. What purpose does that serve, and why is it important?
And absolutely, in the midst of an enormous global crisis, there is no place for racism. There is only place for cooperation and enormous efforts to fight this virus.
Anna, what do you think of the U.S.-China relationship in the shadow of the pandemic?
It's deteriorating. It's not going to be forgotten. I mean, this kind of racist dog whistle that Trump and his administration are using to defame China are really only about his own political future. He's relying on being able to blame China as the reason that he was, instead of acknowledging his incompetency in terms of handling this. I would disagree with my colleague on one issue. We have had 9 coronavirus outbreaks since 2003. The idea that this is somehow a surprise is not. You had in 2015, you had Bill Gates talking about this very kind of situation. You had the WHO, the CDC, every single factual scientific group out there has been forecasting this. So this idea that it's fast-moving, we don't know what to do, we're caught unawares, I think that is not correct. It is simply there was no listening, people were preoccupied, they chose to pursue economic and political goals instead of protecting the health and safety of the people, which is in fact the government's first duty.
Marcus, Australia is a close ally of the United States in the Pacific region. What do you think of the media response towards the official rhetoric in Washington, D.C. about what's going on here in terms of the pandemic and the consequences? I'm talking about the US-China relationship.
Yeah, if I can just go back to the previous point, yes, I agree. The world shouldn't have been taken unawares by this virus, but it simply was by not paying attention to what was going on. And I make a very, very important point. It was mentioned that there's been focus on the economy and the economic consequences, job losses, whatever. China came up with a national slogan immediately upon the emergence of this crisis, and it was "Fight Virus." Now, in the West, that might have been dismissed as Chinese government propaganda and a slogan to support political imperatives, but it wasn't. It was the right thing to do. You must fight this virus, and that's where we've dropped the ball. In terms of the Australia-US relationship, I don't think that's under strain at the moment because simply we've got massive domestic issues. We've got a huge health crisis that we have to address. We have what many people believe is an economic crisis. And in fact, I wrote a piece last week and that was the headline. This is not an economic crisis. Fix the virus, eliminate the virus. So at the end of this, I think there's 2 points for Australia. I think we will come out of this virus a bit better than the United States, perhaps even far better than the United States, and we'll probably come out of it far sooner. So hopefully our attention turns back to China and our China relationship, but certainly there are elements, small elements, but nonetheless vocal elements within the Australian media who certainly support the racist rhetoric coming out of the US, and they are pushing that line. They're very unhelpful, and I think China has a role to play in re-establishing, meaningful dialogue with Australia or improving it, and as do other Western countries. The 2 that spring to mind, or not Western countries, other nations, are Japan and Germany. These are 2 very large economies, very influential economies who have very good relations with China. They also have good relations with the United States. And I think, to me, these are 2 nations who could be pivotal in really establishing global dialogue, which is what we need once we can put this terrible crisis behind us.
Anna, do you think this bilateral relationship is likely to be further decoupled, alienated, or we would rather, as what Vice President McPan said, look at the positive aspects, because China has had greater transparency than in early outbreaks. And he turned on the issue of cooperation instead of continuing down the road of animosity. So what are your expectations?
Well, if it's continuing down the road of less animosity, then I don't think Trump would be instructing all his people to hit all these talk points about it always being China's fault, economically, politically, and health-wise, as well as security. So I think this is just double talk. This is the administration trying to minimize its actual actions by saying on one hand, oh, we're trying to be friends, while they're sticking a knife in China's back. The lessons that China has learned in this have been internal. They have not been something that has been given to them by the West or any other country, especially in view of the remarkable criticisms for what has in essence been China's success, its willingness to do what was necessary in order to protect its people, to get the virus phase out of the way as soon as possible so they could in fact look at the damage done in terms of the economics. So at this point, it is not good. I have a feeling, though, even if there is a Democrat in the White House in a few months, it's not necessarily going to change. It may shift in emphasis. There might be more talk about human rights, etc. But the animosity seems to be inbred now into the U.S. system and is being reflected, unfortunately, in the press.
What do you think of the efforts by President Trump and other politicians in the D.C. to get close to the ethnic Chinese in the United States in an election year?
The Asian community is over 2%. Now, that may sound small, but in closely contested states, The Asian vote could do it. Now, right now, it's not about China versus Trump. It's about Asians versus Trump, because it's not just Chinese who are being signaled out. Japanese, Filipino, you name it, as long as they look Asian and you have some idiot who can't tell the difference, who threatens them either verbally or physically or actually engages in some sort of action against them, physical abuse, those people are going to turn on Donald Trump. They are not going to vote for him. He is not their savior. He has labeled basically all Asians as the problem, and therefore it's going to work against them. Now remember, Donald Trump has done this to the Hispanic community, African American community, to women, and to liberal voters. So he is quickly creating the coalition that could well defeat him come November.
Marcus, confirmed the coronavirus cases are rising rapidly in the United States. The WHO warned that the United States could be the next epicenter. So how can China and the US cooperate in the fight against COVID-19?
Is almost the epicenter. The United States president can wield a great deal of power beyond the borders of the United States. Within the US, his powers are somewhat limited, and the states and state governors have a great deal of power. They're the ones who can mobilize the National Guard in order to calm the population and take measures, and that will be their preoccupation. I simply hope that cooperation comes out of this. China has taught the world a very, very important lesson throughout this pandemic, and that is how to fight it. And as was mentioned earlier on, Bill Gates warned about this in 2015. He didn't label a country or a region or an area. We've had viral outbreaks across the world. And he warned in very, very detailed terms that the world had left itself open to this. And so I think at one point the United States is going to have to reach out to China, and China perhaps across the Pacific to the US, and begin to cooperate and fight this virus together. It serves the purpose of no nation, despite what these absurd conspiracy theorists on Twitter and even in the media, it serves no nation to have a global crisis of this magnitude. It hurts everybody economically, but it hurts us at a human level. This is a terrible crisis for humanity, and really I hope that there can be some meaningful dialogue and cooperation to help the United States get out of this terrible mess.
No pains, no gains. We are paying price in making whatever progress. Now, thanks for watching. This is my last show. 20 years ago, I started hosting this program with questions on the self-fulfilling prophecy of US-China relations. Today, I conclude my television career in stronger anticipation. The two great nations will survive the adversarial circumstances flying over the Himalayas like the darkest days in the Pacific War. I thank all my colleagues and audiences for their critiques and support. I'm proud of what I've done and very grateful. You make my day each time. Farewell, dialogue. Goodbye, CGTN.